Hi, everybody, and welcome to another conversation in Truelogic DX. I'm Bernard. I'm hosting you guys for this 1 hour conversation, and I want to say I appreciate you guys taking the time this afternoon to join us. Uh, I would say out of all of the titles of all of the previous Truelogic DX conversations, I know that this conversation's subject or title was a bit more clickbaity than what we're used to, but it sort of happened organically as most of these sessions begin behind the scenes. What most people might not be aware of is it usually starts as a very casual conversation with whomever we have as a guest. And on those conversations, the topic sort of begins to take shape organically. And when I had a conversation with Laszlo a couple of weeks ago, these are some of the topics that sort of came out in the conversation. So we sort of wound up talking about what is effective messaging, what are buyer personas, how do you manage ad placements, how do you know if it's working, how do you double down on a budget. And so we're going to try to hit all of those topics today. But I am going to try to stop myself from doing a lengthy monologue at the start because I'd like you guys to meet Laszlo. He's a managing partner of Invictus PH and a Philippine veteran in strategic digital marketing campaigns. Welcome, Laszlo.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here, Bernard. No, interesting. And when you first asked me to talk, I was like, okay, what am I gonna talk? It's such a broad topic, right? So
Mm-hmm.
how do you condense everything into such a short time? So I mean, I'm glad we had that initial conversation so we could really, I guess, tackle the more important issues
Mm-hmm.
and get to, I guess, what people are interested in finding out.
Right. And so I think you would have a couple of I think key pointers for us, or at least some thoughts that you wanted to share with us this afternoon. So I'll let you have the floor, so that we can start off with that, and then we can begin the conversation coming from what you share.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. So I'm going to share my
Perfect.
screen right now. I just have really a few slides for you guys. And what I wanted to do was focus on, well, one main idea. And I think from being a practitioner, I think this is something that we've realized or we've learned or we've seen as the evolution really of media on the digital space has taken place, right? So the main thought that I'd really like to share is segmentation is critical. I think when we've talked to a lot of our clients or we've had partners and even when we do our own campaigns, it's the idea of we can't be talking to just one general audience, right? So when we say while our buyers, our consumers, our customers, and however you'd like to call them, while they may be within the Philippines, there are so many ways that we can segment these particular individuals. And what we've gone through in many years of really learning from what we've been doing is that we really have to know who we're talking to. It's well, we start always with the objectives. What is it that we're trying to do? I mean, are we trying to make a sale, or are we just trying to introduce ourselves to our people, to our consumers or potential consumers? But breaking down who we're talking to, what we try to do is we craft a descriptor. No, how would you describe this particular person? And the idea, Bernard, you also touched on it, which we'll probably also get into a bit more, is we create buyer personas. No, so this is a
Mm-hmm.
standard practice for a lot of companies, for a lot of agencies. Um, it's trying to craft who is our ideal customer or ideal consumer. We try to tackle what are their behaviors, where do they go, what platforms do they like using, what do they like
Mm-hmm.
doing when they go online, what type of device do they use, or
What content do
if
they
they're
consume? Right.
yeah,
What content do
exactly.
they consume?
These are like data points that we try to pull out, and these are what we use to describe our personas. And then from there we try to figure out, okay, how are we gonna communicate with them, what would pique their interest. So that's where the com hook comes in. And then we start going into the media platforms, through targeting what are their interests, what else would they be interested in. Like if you're selling shoes, it's always going to be, this person is not thinking about shoes, just shoes 24/7, so there might be other interests that they have. And then the media targeting, whether it's based on let's say a Facebook platform, or we're looking into any of the Google properties or anything else, right? So this is kind of where we start out. We really try to cut up who we're talking to. But beyond this, what we wanted to do, or what we've started to do as a practice really, is we've realized that sometimes when we create buyer personas, we abruptly stop. So let's say we'll create one or two, maybe even go to the extent of creating four different personas. But sometimes these personas are meant to identify, let's say, four disparate or four very different segments. But as you find out later on, there are just slight nuances with your audiences, right? So it's a matter of finding these slight differences and tweaking certain messages. I'm going to show you a short video next. It's it's a video of what we call our audience matrix, and this is what we try to do with all of our clients, depending on how we really segment their audiences, right? So it's an eyeful because it really is an Excel sheet. But for our client right now, and I won't disclose who it was, but it's a milk brand, and essentially they had many types of products. They had the 1 liters, they had in the pet bottles, and they were new to the market a few years back, and they said, how can we enter this particular space? Um, so on the one hand, we had the functional aspect of the product, but on the other hand, we had the more lifestyle section. And somewhere in between, we also had, okay, if we're going to target audiences, maybe we have some broad audiences. So if you take a look at the first two blue columns, we have, let's say, healthy moms and moms for kids. So essentially, this falls into the mother or the mom bucket. But there are slight nuances that we wanted to change because sometimes you have, let's say, the moms that are after the health for themselves, but you also have moms that are really looking out for the health of their children. They may be one and the same person, but sometimes you have to figure out, okay, what is my communication hook for a mother that is more inclined to think of, let's say, her particular health, because let's say her child is let's say breastfeeding instead of consuming this particular milk. So we have a descriptor. We talk about their behavior. What are the com points or the com hooks? How can we talk to them? What are the potential consumption opportunities? The products to push, the SKUs, and then you also go down later on into the media targeting. Like for this one, this was on Facebook, but we also had, let's say, if we get into the Google platforms, what are our targeting parameters? And we also take a look at the audience size. So just to show you the breadth of this particular matrix. So this side, on the blue side, what you're seeing really is the health or the functional aspect of our product. Then as we move towards the right, we also identified like general lifestyle audiences. And as you move further down the spectrum, it's now because of the lifestyle avenue. So I mean, the segmentation really became critical because we wanted to say there are many audiences we want to talk to. It's not just one, meaning let's say milk drinkers in general. If we wanted to enter the market, we really had to talk to all of these different individuals. And I think the other thing that we try to take a look at also is when you talk about what is our relationship essentially with our customers, our consumers. I think one, as I've noticed when we talk to a lot of our clients, they always come in, okay, this is our basic objective. Let's say we want to build awareness, we want them to buy. So whether you're at the top of the funnel or at the bottom of the funnel, sometimes you have to realize that you probably have customers that are in varying stages of the funnel. So meaning to say, when we communicate with them, the message that you're giving to somebody who you're trying to introduce your brand to is not the same message you want to give somebody that's actually been, you know, buying your brand for the past 3 months. It's very different in the way that you communicate with them. So in terms of segmenting, it's about how we describe them. You know, what is the persona we want to build? If we take a look at it from a bigger perspective on a matrix level, what are the nuances? But also we have to figure out, okay, because we have built a relationship or we have zero relationship with them, we have to change our message for these particular audiences. So I mean that's really the biggest thing I wanted to bring to the table, so that it's not just a general what is the best advertising platform, really a bit deeper in terms of our conversation.
Right. I think I think that's a great starter for the conversation we're going to have this afternoon. And it's not really a lot of time to be able to talk about marketing, but we're going to try to get as many actionable items as we can for the people that are joining us in this conversation. So I say let's start off with the personas, and I'll start off very basic, Laszlo. So we deal with a lot of businesses where some of them are pretty mature, like meaning their buyer personas are pretty established. They'll have three, they'll have four, they'll define the age, they'll define the economic capabilities, they'll define the interests, like meaning brands that are so good at knowing who their customers are that if they bumped into them in the street, they would know, like they
Yeah.
would recognize, oh, that's my target audience.
Yeah.
And yet we also have clients that, sort of have a cast a wide net messaging strategy. Clearly, they have not gone through their different buyer personas. So I think a what should motivate a business to start doing this and start taking it more seriously, right? Like for me, I tell people on the practical side, when you know who you're targeting, you don't have to spend as much on such a
Mhm.
large net, right? You just get more bang for your buck. How do you convince people to say, okay, wait, let's take a step back. Let's look at who your customers are. Like, do you know who you're selling to? How do you get them into this exercise?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Great question to start with. No? And I think it also depends, as you mentioned, on the level of maturity, and I guess
Mhm.
how long the business has also been well running. And the next question would also be: have they been running on digital? Have they been doing a lot of activities? You always start with what what you can
Mhm.
find out from what you've been doing, and I guess that's the starting point. And if this company has actually been doing, let's say, some paid media activities, what are the major things that you've learned from all of
Mhm.
these activities? Uh, have you been able to tap a certain segment, or are we still at the phase that we can't really define them because we're getting a wide spectrum? Um,
Right.
so I mean, casting a wide net is always good if you're a new brand because you're really trying to introduce yourself to
Right.
a wider
You want
market.
them to see, yeah, you
But
want ubiquity is good for you. Like you want to be seen everywhere.
yes, exactly. But at the same time, I think even the product people or the marketing people within an organization will also know that while we probably intended this particular product to a particular segment. So I mean, it is a bit of this is my hypothesis, and I have to test my hypothesis rather than, let's say, spend millions on casting a
Mhm.
wider net. Perhaps you want to test your hypothesis first before breaking the bank essentially. So
Right.
it's a I think something that we've always practiced or we've always stated in digital. It's a very iterative process. So you have to continuously improve and keep well doing what you're doing, and
Right.
but you have to learn. So you don't just keep doing the same thing, but you have to learn from what you've been doing in the past. So you
So
start with the
how
hypothesis, test it.
so how do they know whether they've developed enough personas to begin a good campaign on, and whether there's not enough personas to build a campaign off of? I think this is a very practical question for all of them. Like, are two personas good enough? Do I need four? Should I have six? Like, oh, the sheet Laszlo showed us was so huge. Does it need to be that big?
Yeah, well, it's from a general perspective. No, I mean, you obviously don't just have one. I think that would be the worst case scenario where you're putting all of your eggs into one basket.
Mhm.
Normally, I would inform clients that we have to have at least two because if it's an experiment, you have to test particular hypotheses with particular variables, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
two would be the base requirement, but
Okay.
even let's say these brands would also know their potential consumers, or when they were developing the product they said these are the audiences that we had in mind. Those would always be the best starting points. Like I can't think of any product that would just have top of my head that would just have one type of
Yeah.
consumer. So I mean, like even if you say, let's say, a bar of soap, like yung sabon panlaba, right? I mean, you think about it. Normally, the traditional method would be, I'm probably talking to the homemaker, the mother.
Right.
But then sometimes, like for those that are more affluent, perhaps those that have, let's say, household help, they have a preference, or they realize that this cleans better. So I mean, those are little nuances that you kind of have to think about when also marketing your particular product.
Right. Because in some cases, I think the decision making for, let's say, using what laundry brand is entirely delegated to to whoever is responsible for that responsibility in the house. And then there are times where it's the mom that is the decision maker for all the brands that are used in the
Yeah.
house. And then you also have to figure out, what is the primary driving force in desire? Is it economics? Is it effectiveness? Is it convenience? Because
Yeah. I mean,
I
like
think
these
you
are
cannot be
all
everything to
factors.
everybody.
Exactly. So I mean, like sometimes, let's say, even when you're doing your advertising, maybe it's a function of communication. What is it that you want to kind of push forward? I mean, you mentioned some, like, is it, let's say, the smell, or is it the price? Is it the
Mhm.
effectiveness? Is it availability? I mean, so those are the little things that we have to play around with. But if we're just starting with, let's say, the personas, we define the personas, don't stick to one bucket, and then those little things also become your other variables that you kind of uh, well, play around with. I don't know if that's the right word, but the other variables that you're testing as you put
Right.
your communication out there.
So as an example, let's say I was a brand, and let's say the vertical I'm in is consumer hygiene products, and I'm a new entrant into the market, or at least a relatively new entrant into the market. But the problem is I compete with behemoths like Unilever and P&G, and these guys have money to throw at, they have money to throw my product at the back of the shelf, right? So if I compete with these, how do I like, what kind of persona should I develop so that I can get more visibility, so that I can get a fair share of the pie, and so that I'm not, so that I don't necessarily abandon a market, a playing field, just because it's dominated by a Unilever or a Procter and Gamble.
Yeah, so I think that's where it gets kind of tricky, especially when you're dealing with, let's say, with the giants, and you're probably really going after the same audience
Mhm. Right.
as most of them would define them. So this is where the communication plays a large role, right? So
Mhm.
whether it's testing your various communication lines or communication hooks with these particular audiences, and perhaps doing just tweaking within your targeting parameters. Because let's say if it's a personal hygiene, let's say for men, right? Um, I mean, it's very, very clearly defined, and you're probably going to have the same age demographics.
Mhm.
Whether it's geography will play a part also, but um, that persona is defined. So you might want to play around, let's say, with define your different males, like the athlete, the office worker, um, the person that's just at home. And essentially, when you have these different personas, you're breaking them down, and you're trying to find what are the particular consumption or need opportunities for these
Mhm.
individuals, and tailor fit the message towards these personas. So it's working with one persona, but I guess having uh, the it's the nuanced conversations that you'll probably have with these individuals. So
Mhm.
it stems from a base persona, but trying to find the little differences that will allow you to enter that conversation.
Right.
And I think really having that personalized approach will allow you to enter the space that the giants are occupying at any given moment.
Right. Uh, in terms of communication strategy, right? Because we talked about the persona, and who you're talking to really determines what you talk about, right? Like, take for example, for you and me, we're not going to talk about model kit building because I don't know if you're necessarily into that. I'm super
Yeah,
into that. But what we have in common. So clearly, the kind of conversations I would have with you are the things that you and I have in common. Uh,
yeah.
and so the audience that you talk to determines what kind of messaging you can put out. How much guidance, how much of the messaging guidance is provided by, let's say, your brand's value proposition and the audience? Like, how do those affect each other? Because clearly your value proposition doesn't change, right? I'll go back to the example of the hygiene products. Let's say my value proposition is I'm proudly Philippine made. I use more organic products than the big bad competitors. But my biggest value proposition is I'm proudly Philippine made, right? I help create Filipino jobs. I'm 100% made here. I want Filipinos to be
Mhm.
proud of a quality product that can compete with P&G and Unilever. Let's say this is my value proposition, and then let's say I identify, okay, I've got, let's say, male targets, or let's say I've got female millennial targets. Uh, how much weight does my value proposition have in my message, and how much weight does the persona of my target audience have on my message?
Well, that's always going to be a struggle between, I think,
Mhm.
when agencies also present, and the brands themselves when they say, we have to get this particular message out, and the value proposition of any brand is important, and it's something that they would like to communicate. But I think the one way that we can balance this or really try to figure out is, what is working, is we have these messages also going out simultaneously, right? So I mean, think of it as one creative material that focuses on the value propositions of a brand, whether it's, let's say, three different ads that are pushing one value prop each. But then you also have, let's say, a nuanced ad that comes out and really talks
Mhm.
about, this is my hypothesis that this will really catch the attention of my audience.
Mhm.
So what you want to do is, if it is like you're testing your hypothesis together and in a controlled space with all of these different variables happening, and if, let's say, as the agency, you come back and say, okay, this is what happened essentially when it is a value prop push.
Mhm.
They don't really appreciate it because they know it's very brand speak. But when it's on, the personal relevance of the product, because we found that way to talk to them, it's actually very effective, and this is driving the performance of our material. Then that is your way, let's say, as an agency or as a brand person, to say that I really think we should move forward with this. And we won't know that until we really test out our
Right.
messaging.
Right.
So I mean, it's a balance really of what the brand wants to push and what we feel will work for the brand in the long run.
Right. Because I think, the you do sort of have to balance out like who you're talking to, right? Is it a mom with children? Are you talking to people on the go, right? And all of that sort of determines what kind of strategy you wind up building. Um, so let's say you sort of craft a message. So I get it. So you craft a message, you'll never really know if it's right. Like you can only test like whether or not does your hypothesis work or not, and then you double down on what works, and then you abandon what doesn't. If people want it to be a bit more practical, let's say, what's a good conservative budget? Like if I'm advertising on YouTube and I'm advertising on Google Display, let's say, what's a good conservative budget to test? Kasi I think a lot of brands, and I think it's natural for most businesses, no, gusto nila when they spend a budget on something, of course they want a return.
Yeah.
And so many people I think are very afraid of, oh, it's a test. Then I'm going to put 20,000 pesos on it. I mean, I get that a lot. Like we get that a lot. And there are some brands that are very daring. Na, sige, sige, fine. A/B test natin. Run natin simultaneously. And then let's
Yeah.
double down on the one that works. But we do get the occasional, huh? Test? 20,000 pesos?
Yeah.
So, I
So
mean, how
before
do
I
you,
answer that question,
yeah.
there was one thing I wanted just to add. I think also when we have, just to the value proposition, no, I
Mhm.
think sometimes when we take a step back and say, okay, all of our advertising that's going to happen, we also have to understand that, let's say, sometimes that's what traditional media is also used for, right? So you use your TV commercial or your print ads to talk about the value proposition of the brand. But and that's where the, I guess, the beauty and the benefit of going digital is you have
Mhm.
the ability to actually give these particular messages to the audience as you define them. So if you're going to also try to force fit the value proposition on the digital space, it may be a matter, and I guess the segue into this next topic is, what do you just put a little budget into that, because you're already communicating that on other
Mhm.
platforms, like on other mediums. Yeah, I guess to answer your question, when you ask, and this is one of the toughest questions to ask now, when they say, what's a good budget to set
Yeah.
aside, and
At least
I
for a
always
test, right? At least if you're A/B testing, like what's a good budget to set aside?
I always throw it back, or I try to reverse it. It's like, what do you want to get out of it? Essentially, what is your KPI first?
Mhm.
Because we work backwards with that, and we say that, I mean, for a test, and I guess putting the data hat on and saying that, we need this many respondents or replies or whatever to
Mhm.
get a good sample size, and that's what we work with. So we say, with if we want to get, let's say, 10,000 whatever engagement or sign up or whatever KPI it is, this is essentially the budget that we'll need for that. Now, whether you're comfortable to use this budget as a test, is a different question. And if you feel
Right.
that, okay, perhaps we don't need that many, then obviously the budget will also become different. So it's I guess taking a look at it from a different perspective. Instead of looking first at the budget, look at what you're trying to achieve first,
Mhm.
and then work your way to what it will take to get
Right.
to those
Right. No, no,
KPI.
I think that's perfectly reasonable, right? Like, take, for example, I'll just share when Truelogic determines its marketing budget, so it's not always a percentage of revenue or whatnot. What we try to get to is we try to get every potential sales conversation to a value of $100, And in SEO, for digital marketing and SEO, by the way, that's cheap. Like, to get a valid lead, to get a valid inquiry at $100 or less, considering ang average contract value mo is $24,000, that's cheap, right? That's a return of like one is
A
to
good return.
yeah, that's like a superbly good return. So for us, that's sort of how we determine it. Like, okay, but at the end of this experiment, we need to be able to have good starter conversations, and the value of that conversation has to be at about $100. No, and then we double down on the activities that are below $100, and then we stop the ones that go significantly higher than $100. So I get exactly what you mean, but for everybody else that's joining us in the conversation, that's sort of what we mean when we say, how do I put a budget on it? Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. And for us, when we market, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get inquiries to come in through the website, through the chat, through a call, and whatnot. So let's say there are broad guidances, let's say on messaging, like they identified, sige, they have like 2, 3 market segments, or they've got 2, 3 buyer personas. They've come up with the messaging that they want for these persona, like value proposition, ano yung desire building message nila, what's their consideration message. Kasi awareness message, that's just, brand. And so that'll
Yeah.
fall everywhere. Now they get the portion where, okay, so how about placement? So let's say I have 100,000 pesos this month, and what I want is to have X inquiries for X thousand pesos. So let's say I want to have one inquiry per 2,000 pesos. Let's say, so my 100,000 pesos is supposed to get me what, about 50 qualified inquiries, let's say. How do they go about the task of picking what channel to use and what budget to allocate to that channel? Like, say YouTube, say search, the displays, or the marketing, even Facebook, right? So if I was going to split apart that 100K, 200K budget, let's say 100K para madali yung percentages. Let's say if I broke apart a 100K budget into the different placements, how do they go about that exercise?
Yeah. Okay. So that's another common question that you'd normally get. No?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's really a distribution of let's say a limited I guess budget that we have. No, and I think it's also about really understanding first where your customers are and where they're probably most active. And when we say they're most active, this is probably where they're also going to be most receptive to a particular type of message. I think well, there are many factors that will go into it. You try to take a look at what is your product, what
Mhm.
vertical are you in, and where would you fit based on how your consumers act
Right.
in a particular platform. uh, I think one of the next steps also there, and this is digital media is a tedious activity.
Mhm.
There's a lot of research that goes into it.
Yep.
Well, I
Yep.
think it's right just because you're going to be spending your money. So you may also want to go into these particular platforms and find out, you go through the motions of putting in your audiences as you define them. You put in your parameters, and from the system in itself will give you some estimates, rough estimates, essentially, of what you'll be able to get, depending if you're going for engagement or if you're looking for leads.
Mhm.
Um, if you if you've had I guess the historical data, maybe you can also say that it told me I would get 100 leads for 100,000, but historically, I got a little less. So you can factor those little things into what the results will be, right? So normally, depending on the scale of the budget, also, I always advise clients that we don't want to spread ourselves too thin.
Mhm.
um, so it's a factor of what am I going to get from these platforms as based on projections. And if it just seems like I probably don't want to go into 4 platforms, maybe I'll focus on 2, so that
Mhm.
because the returns are most efficient in these 2 particular platforms, then
Right.
that's the strategy to go with, as opposed to, I may get a little more if I spread myself on all four platforms, but that also means that I don't reach a particular saturation level, and I may just be getting repeat across these four platforms. So I mean, there are many factors we want to consider, but you also consider what are the returns and what are the benefits that I get out of from these different platforms.
Right. That actually segues us into the platform's conversation, right, Laszlo? So take for example, I think on the conversation you and I had, we were talking about Philippine behaviors towards advertising and the Philippine mentality, like how it's such a we're such a showbiz culture, right? Like when people do media, they must have a celebrity endorser. But when you go to Facebook and when you go to digital, the what you discover is that you get more bang for your buck on the smaller influencers than you do on the celebrity influencers. It's because the belief system and whatnot, and the relationship between the more niche influencer just tends to be. I guess it's a more intimate relationship. Like they know their audience better, and the audience knows who they are better than the larger celebrity. But when you take a look at the attitude of media and digital, they're a bit paradoxical. Like you want to have multiple little influencers when you do digital, but when you do media, you need the celebrity. Like I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like the dependence on celebrity endorsements, like especially when you do trad media, is that a necessity in the Philippine market?
Well, I think Filipinos still really like the celebrity endorsers, no. But as a brand, and if you're really trying to become efficient, you use the celebrity endorsers to give a hero message. Essentially, it's
Mm,
this is your one big placement, and you're going to spend on it. So a new formulation or it's a new product, and you need this to get the ubiquity or to get the mass awareness
right.
and reach. But like you mentioned, and we've experienced this also with a lot of our campaigns. Um, the micro or the smaller influencers are the ones that also nurture their relationship with their followers.
Mhm.
So in and they're the ones that also I guess drive better results for brands, because when you engage also these micro influencers, I think they also take pride. They also take pride in the fact that we're helping move this brand forward, especially if
Mhm.
they believe in this particular brand. The the
Right.
the celebrities are really there to I guess lend their face and to your brand. But the micro influencers will actually push your brand. They know their customer or they know their followers. They know the people and they've
Right.
built a relationship with these people. So it's their reputation essentially on the line also.
And they're the ones that also move them down the funnel, right? They're the ones that will move them down the sales funnel. They'll move them forward through the customer journey. To me, I think that's a big deal. Like, because I think everybody wants to be able to afford a celebrity endorser. But I think you hit a really good nail on the head when you said you need the celebrity to get a key hero message out, and then that's it, right? That's what you need it for. Because ultimately, that's still a branding conversation. You're still trying to drive awareness and ubiquity. So I'll go back to the digital channels. Uh, Facebook. I will usually tell people you cannot market in the Philippines and not be on Facebook. No, to the point that Truelogic is on Facebook. Like this thing is being broadcast on Facebook live, right? Like doesn't matter how much of a not social person I am. It's you cannot be in the Philippines and not utilize Facebook. Is there a situation where Facebook is not the right channel for a brand?
Yeah, well, I think brands should have many different activities, right? And
Mhm.
from an advertising perspective, Facebook is always something that's, well, I don't want to say always. Facebook is something that's essential now,
Mhm.
primarily because it is the largest platform also that Filipinos are on. Um, I think the latest numbers were, in fact, we're over indexed, right? So we have about 80 to 76 to 80 million Filipinos that are using internet, but the
Correct.
numbers
Correct.
on
According
Facebook
according
are
to
representing
Facebook.
about 80. Yeah,
Right.
so there's a lot more, and there are people with multiple accounts on Facebook, but this is the largest audience base if you want to get your message out. Although because of the iOS changes, that there may
Yeah.
be some changes in the next few days, next few weeks. Plus, Facebook also has access to other properties like Instagram, which is another popular social platform. Um, they may start also rolling out advertising on a chat app like WhatsApp. So I mean, the ecosystem of Facebook is quite large, and that is why, from messaging and advertising standpoint, it is essential at the moment. But if you're looking at, let's say, niche groups or particular segments, you may also want to explore other avenues. Like
Mhm.
as I've seen, let's say for people that are into, let's say, food delivery or even home improvement, like Instagram is one of the advertising wise, this is a good place.
Mhm.
This is a good place to advertise because they actually get a lot of returns. um, I think some of the other platforms are also that are coming up are, well, I haven't seen advertising yet, let's say on TikTok, but I was just looking at some numbers recently, and the penetration of TikTok in the Philippines is almost at 50%. So that's a
Wow.
huge jump from pre-pandemic, right? When we were at about 15%, and now we're at about 50%. So I'm sure brands are already starting to think, how can I get into TikTok for a particular audience? No, it will
Mhm.
really depend if the brand also fits within that platform. So I think while you take a look at all of these, you also want to, you kind of have to determine if it's a viable option and if your message also fits within a particular platform, depending on who you're talking to. But
Mhm.
I would agree with you in your primary statement, that right now Facebook still probably is the largest advertising platform. Um, Google has all its benefits, and when I say Google, this would be on, let's say, search, um,
Right.
display as well, and even YouTube. But you have, again, it'll all go back to the idea that as long as we've defined that our audience also uses these particular platforms, and if we're, I guess, relatable in these particular platforms.
Mhm. Right. So I think the advice we tend to give people when it comes to the Facebook question, because normally it doesn't really conflict with SEO, but it does conflict with, I would say, SEM budgets. Like when you want to do Google display, for some reason, Facebook advertising and Google display budgets tend to be drawn from the same budget.
Mhm.
No, like they call it digital media placement. To me, that's very different. Um, and when they do, uh, people ask us, okay, should I throw this much budget on Facebook and should I throw this much budget on AdWords? Like which channel should I go with? And we tell them it really depends on how much movement happens online and how much movement happens in real life. No, Facebook, I would say, is more similar to traditional media. Like it is about ubiquity. It is about getting your message out there. It is about like a broad reach to the audience that you're trying to tap. And AdWords is a bit more targeted. But the other benefit of AdWords is you get to see everything from start to finish. But or sorry, you have to be able to see everything from start to finish happening in a website. And so let's say you're a technology company, let's say you're a payment portal. Like let's say Paymaya is a great example. You want to know how many users are adopting your portal. You want to know how many users are downloading your app, then AdWords might be for you. You want to use Facebook sort of to feed the funnel at the top, but you probably want to convert from AdWords, like is what we usually tell people. But if you're moving inventory, let's say in a grocery, in a supermarket, if there is traditional inventory movement, and then let's say your product is sexy, like your product is sexy, meaning it's visually appealing, then some form of a budget is probably necessary on a social media platform. It's just that it's the market we work with. I wouldn't say that would be the rule for. I wouldn't say that that would be the rule for Singapore or that would be the rule for Australia, right? The Philippines is a super social, hyper social digital environment. Laszlo, have you checked? Like, I mean, are we still like number one in terms of content consumption, Facebook usage, like worldwide? Because we
Yeah,
were, right?
we are.
2020.
Actually, the numbers when you're looking at it also is um, we used to consume content at about 10 hours a day. And
Yeah.
this was beginning of 2020. Beginning of 2021, so meaning to say the pandemic has actually increased our consumption by about an hour.
Right, right,
Um, so social media usage by about 30 minutes more. So I mean, we are highly social and we use these
right.
platforms. Although I
And
wanted to
and
point out,
yeah,
in terms of as a general rule, I agree. Let's say the AdWords, Google search will really help in terms because people are already searching for something, right? And that's the value of the search ads. They're closer to an action, meaning whether it's to sign up, to buy, to do something, because they're actively searching
Mhm.
for these things or using keywords. However, what I've realized also, while Facebook can be utilized as a like in the traditional sense from a mass awareness perspective, I think the system in Facebook has gotten a lot smarter through the years in
Mhm.
the sense where you can drive them to particular actions. But this becomes a bit more complicated where you have to set up your pixel, all of
Right.
your events within your website. But the beautiful thing about using the Facebook platform is, um, well, I really believe in the custom audiences and the
Mhm.
remarketing lists wherein Facebook is I think they've done a beautiful job on it. Um, Again, I just bring up the idea that now that iOS 14.5 is here, I don't know how
Yeah.
that's going to affect it. Um, but I think Facebook can be utilized to really drive people down the funnel, and actually do have a few clients that are well are using this strategy. So it's a lot of different factors that go in. Really just making sure that we're
Mhm.
measuring our consumers or our customers at every step of the way, so that we can continue our conversations with them.
But what about persistence, like remarketing? Remarketing on Facebook versus remarketing on AdWords. When to throw a budget on one and when to throw a budget on the other.
Yeah. Well, I think, and this is a soft rule for
Yeah.
me, right? I think that Facebook, if you're going to do, let's say, let's call it $100, I would skew it a little bit more to Facebook, just because that that Facebook is a daily habit for a lot of
Mm.
consumers, right? So the I guess the potential is will skew towards Facebook for your consumer to see it, depending just how you set your ads. If you've, let's say, uh, how many times the person can see an ad of yours over a given week, right? But it's more likely that they'll see your ad on Facebook as to, let's say, a Google property, especially if, let's say, you're doing search engine marketing, wherein there has to be a trigger for them. There are various triggers that need to happen for them to search for it.
Mhm.
Whereas on Facebook, it's if they're scrolling through their feed, it might appear. So the likelihood is just higher there.
Okay, so I'll just I guess just as a reminder, for you guys that are encountering that you guys have questions like while I'm throwing Laszlo questions, they're not as random as you think. But if you are experiencing that you have some questions that you'd love to ask, now's the time to start throwing them onto the chat, so that we can address them at the end of the conversation. I've still got a few more questions in my pocket. Don't worry, like this is not the closing of the conversation. But just to give us, I think, a roundup of what we've covered so far, right? So you've got a brand. A brand has a value proposition. There are certain audiences that are receptive to that value proposition. Your job is to find out who they are, like be able to bump into your target audience on the street and recognize them. Aha, my target audience. And it cannot be everybody. And so you want to segment your messaging and build out your buyer personas. Once you've got your buyer personas, you craft your messaging and then you deliver your message on certain channels. So that's sort of what we've covered so far. Now let's talk about execution. So at this point in the conversation, yes, guys, if you're smelling an ulterior motive, there might be an ulterior motive. Invictus is an agency, Truelogic is an agency. uh, Laszlo, when should they be doing it in-house, and when is it time to start talking to an agency? No, kasi kami we encounter this a lot also. We have worked with clients where the marketing team is in-house and they tried it themselves, and then they start talking to an agency 2 years down the line. And then we've also worked with people that have no captive digital marketing team. It's just gone from one vendor to the next to the next to the next. When is
Mhm.
it appropriate to get a vendor to do your digital marketing, and when is it appropriate to talk to an agency to do your digital marketing?
Yeah. Well, I think first I'd like to take the whether it's something to do in-house versus talking to a third party, right?
Mm,
I think it depends also on, well, the skill set, and if you actually have somebody that can focus on
right,
digital marketing, because
right.
technically digital marketing will become a full-time activity, even if it's just focused on paid. purely paid media. I mean, if it also goes into let's say community management, I mean that's another topic in itself,
Mm-hmm.
right? So honestly, like I would always suggest, let's say companies, if you're not equipped with that particular person, maybe you want to talk to an agency or a, let's say, a vendor to help you assess, what type of skill sets you need. Maybe you could get these people on board to help you set certain things up and get you going, um, until you're ready to actually hire somebody that can handle it for you.
Mm-hmm.
However, if it's really you, like the organization feels it's not a core competence, and they probably do more harm than good by having somebody just focused on this, then that's really the time you may want to talk to a vendor or an agency. Um, Typically, let's say when you say vendor, I guess your definition is these platforms, or
No,
let's say
when I say I'm looking for a vendor, I mean talking to people like us, right? Like talking when
uh,
should we start talking to entities like Invictus, like Truelogic, versus having a captive team that does it.
I,
What
I I don't think I don't think it hurts when these companies also just whether it's a consultation period or they really
Mhm.
want to engage already. They have it in mind that they want to engage with these companies, because it really starts out with the conversation in terms of let's assess where how we can help you out, and um, perhaps you have somebody that will champion and we can help this person develop the skills that they need to move forward. um, if it really won't happen, then you can engage the agency like full time. It's
Right,
always going to be flexible, but it really begins with the conversation more than anything.
right. For us, the advice that we give is there somebody in the organization, like if you hire this in-house, is there somebody in the organization that will understand what this person does, right? Because if not, like then how do you manage if you don't understand the work that that person does? And sometimes a business's core competency, like take for example, if you're a bank, the core competency of a bank is financials, right? Marketing is not necessarily sort of its core competency. And so in their case, having it captive or sourcing it out is usually a very easy conversation for them, because banks tend to veer away from what is not their core competency. Like if they can outsource it, they'll outsource it because they want to stick to their core competency, which I think is a decision that takes guts. So you recommend starting off with a consultation, like at least having somebody help you build out a strategy and then try to see if you can execute well to that strategy. And then if you're realizing that, you know, it's either for some reason it's not becoming somebody's full-time job, or okay, it's somebody's full-time job, but it looks like he's working 16 hours a day. It's sort of when you start wanting to talk to agencies a bit more seriously.
Yeah, and I think also, well, interesting that you mentioned also banks, no, in the sense that there will be certain industries where they want to do it in house because
Mhm.
I guess there are some privacy issues.
Mhm.
And we've dealt some with clients before where we started the conversation and they were going to bring us on board as their full time, let's say, media agency, but
Right.
uh, somewhere in the middle they said, oh wait, sorry, we can't do certain executions because
Mhm.
there will be a transfer of information, and because of all of the privacy laws, and
Right.
they're very compliant with the privacy laws, it can't pass through agency. So we said, okay,
Right.
then perhaps we can ease off on certain executions, and since we've been with you for some time, you've kind of picked up on how to go about these executions and what you need to do. So it's sometimes it becomes a hybrid sort of a part consultation and part we really bring you on board to do the work for us.
Okay, I've got one last topic now, just to round up the conversation about essentials. So, okay, brand value proposition, who is your target audience, the different, breaking them apart into personas, crafting a message that speaks to those specific personas, not crafting a message that's like one size fits all, but crafting a message that suits your personas, distributing the message in the right channel. Don't be afraid to experiment, A/B test, throw a budget,
Mhm.
double down on the ones that work, and scrap the ones that don't. Uh, so let's say and then deciding whether do you need a vendor or are you doing it in-house. Let's say you've gone through all of these steps. I think the last step to figure out is it working or is it not are metrics. So, and that's the
Yeah.
last question before I throw a few lightning round questions and then questions from the audience. So the last bit is, how do they know, how do I know if it's working? How do I know that my 50,000 pesos was worth it? How do I know that my 200,000 pesos was worth it, like this month, right?
Yes.
So how do you teach people to take a look at the return on their investment? How do you teach people to take a look at, uh, how do they get value for their money? How do I as a business get a sense that I got value for my money?
Yeah. So I mean, again, another common question is that, and they always ask, what is the industry standard, right?
Right,
How do I know
right. That's
I'm
the
doing well or
favorite.
not?
That's the favorite term, right? What's the industry standard?
So I mean, it's well, there are two parts siguro to my answer right now. And I'll go back to what I said earlier in the sense that um what is it that you want to achieve, right? So from the get go, you kind of know what your targets are, and when you say what your targets are, essentially this is based on the magic number that you formulated in saying that this is how much I'm willing to spend on a customer to get them to do a particular action. So that is the KPI I'm looking at. Now, in the first run, I think that's acceptable in the sense that you're trying to build a baseline for your performance on everything that you do online. As you move forward, it's always going to be a task of how can I improve on my previous performance. So rather than look at an industry standard, you look at your brand standard and you try to improve as you move forward.
Mm,
So that's how you say, is it working? I mean, assuming parameters are the same, objectives are the same, then you can say definitely it's working because we're moving to become more efficient and more effective
right,
towards communicating with our audiences rather than
right,
say, okay, an industry standard, you don't know the other variables that have gone into what is a so-called industry standard, quote
right,
unquote. So you measure against yourself because I mean, you would be your best competition
right,
in that
right.
sense. If you want to always improve yourself.
Yeah, and I agree. No, like for example, the digital marketing space is a great example. Most digital marketing companies in the Philippines are privately held. Very few are publicly traded companies, and so you don't really get to see their finances and what they spend on marketing and whatnot. Uh, but and so what you do, because you cannot see what your competitor does or what the standards of your competitors are, is you compete against your previous month's performance, right? Like when we do marketing reviews for ourselves, we take a look at, okay, top funnel. Do we have more top funnel activity? Not activity as in work. Do we have more top funnel activity from the audience this month than previous month? Click through rate, the messaging we have on search, the messaging on the banners, the messaging on the ads, are they so good that we can get people to click them and then consume content on our website, right? The website's conversion rate, okay, out of all of the number of visitors we accommodated and welcomed into our website, how many of them started a conversation with us and how many of them, sort of window shop? And it's always just a measurement of where do we stand today versus the last 30 days. And so I think that's pretty good practice. That's usually practiced in digital marketing a lot. uh, I'll give the audience a few more minutes to drop their questions into the chat box. In the meantime, I've got some lightning round questions, Laszlo. These are like the fun questions. Uh, so
Okay.
I asked a few people this question, like your opinion of the RC Cola ad, like the RC Cola campaign. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, when RC Cola ad came out, initially I was like, "What is this?" But then, after like watching it the second, third time, I enjoyed it. I mean,
Mm,
for the first time that it came out, it was really meant to shock the audience. So
mhm,
for what it was worth, I think it was a good piece of advertising. And I think
mm.
results wise, we've seen since then the brand has actually benefited from the advertising. So
Right.
that particular execution, I think, was good.
Right. So in essence, it worked, right? And that's all that
Yeah.
matters, that ad worked. Okay. Opinion about TikTok. Is it an emerging social media channel? Should marketers, digital agencies start looking at it seriously as a channel for brands?
Well, okay, as a platform in itself, devoid of
Mhm.
anything marketing, I think it's here to stay. There is what we call the remixing. It's a new it's a new phenomenon where you take something that previously existed and you
Mhm.
add your own value into it. So like you notice right now in TikTok, I don't know if you're a user or you just read about it, but a lot of the old music is coming to life again because of TikTok. I mean, the this younger generation is discovering old music, they're cutting it up and then they're adding their own dance moves or
Mhm.
whatever they want to add to it. So this remixing, you can see it on happening on Instagram and on Facebook, but it really started from TikTok. So I think as a platform, it's here to stay. As marketers, I think it's an avenue you kind of want to keep an eye out for.
Mhm.
Um, but I really don't think the traditional method of advertising would be something that digital marketers will want to look at. You have to find a
Mhm.
different way to use it as a platform for advertising, or at least for marketing and getting your message out there.
Uh, Apple eventually joining the ad wars. A, do you think it'll happen? And B, do you think it'll happen in the Philippines?
But I mean, if it happens globally, it will eventually trickle down to us.
Mhm.
I think they eventually will really join. Although they have battles on many fronts, from app developers to advertisers. I think
Right,
well, Apple, Facebook, those are the two giants that are really going at it right now. But
right.
Apple in itself has battles with a lot of the app developers, and these are like the huge app developers like Epic Games. So I
Yeah.
mean, they're beset with a lot of legal battles right now.
And Google tends
I
to be a bit more diplomatic, Like, I mean, even that row they're having with Australia, Google was saying, no way, we're not sharing revenue when we drive traffic to your website. And then eventually, when the court ruling came out, they go like, okay, we'll build a revenue sharing model for news publishers.
yeah,
And
I
then
think
they're
they're
not
going
very
around.
affected by this Apple thing, right? Because Google Pay has a relationship with Apple where they are the default search provider. But
Yeah,
Facebook does not have the same thing, and so that's why Facebook sort of has a spat with Apple at the moment.
yeah. I don't know all of the stories that are going on behind like in the tech world, and I'm sure it's also an issue of personalities that are clashing.
Mhm.
I think Google has played ball more than Facebook has.
Right.
Um, So I mean, there was something that really triggered this Apple Facebook war. But as we've seen, for some of the, like, we have the business managers on Facebook, it has be they have been affected in
Mhm.
terms of, let's
Yeah.
say, event and pixel. Well, especially to do with the pixel. So we've
Right.
had to recalibrate. So it has trickled down already to us, and now this next wave is something that we really have to be wary of.
Mhm. Uh, okay, so we've got some questions that came in, and I'll just read through some of them.
Sure.
The first is, would you advise social media or AdWords advertising for websites that earn through AdSense?
Okay.
Yeah, so are those good platforms?
Would you advise social media or AdWords
Yeah,
advertising
like
for
do
web?
you advise that they, I guess, augment their traffic, augment their visitors, when the way they make money is through advertising on their website? So I guess it's a publisher.
Yeah. Well, I think for especially for publishers, right? You're trying to build a habit with potential readers, and so when you do your advertising, I think the first trick is to try to get them there, and the next trick is to try to make your content sticky enough so that they keep
Mhm.
visiting. And in terms of building a habit, I think an investment in terms of, let's say, using social media to drive them there, you always try to look for these avenues to drive people to your website, and that is the main source of revenue. So I would advise, yes, but you have to figure out in terms of how much are you willing to spend to get X
Mhm.
number of traffic. There has to be a little math involved here in terms of, how much traffic do you want to get for you to be able to earn, and
Right.
that goes how much am I willing to refunnel back into advertising.
Right. I might also say you might want to split up how you make revenue, not just limited to AdSense. You might want to do affiliate marketing where you don't get paid for the click of the ad. You get a commission in case the content on your ad drives a sale, right? Like meaning they click the they read your content, they click the banner, and they made a purchase, let's say for a laptop. Those tend to be more lucrative. They go between 3 to 8%, depending on the website that you're working with. And so having that as a channel for making revenue and not just limiting yourself to AdSense might make in reinvesting into marketing more profitable for you. There's a follow-up question that I think I'll take. The follow-up question was, okay, if I'm driving non-organic visitors through to my website, is it still good for the site's SEO rankings? And the answer is not necessarily. So I would say, yes, it will have an impact. in terms of impact, it will probably be a 2 out of 10. There are behavioral metrics involved in SEO, like meaning once they're on your site, driven by whatever channel or not, Google always assesses the quality of an interaction that a user has inside your website. And then if that user comes back as an organic visitor later, that becomes good for your SEO. But meaning, does having a lot of paid visitors to your website necessarily affect your SEO? No, and not in the short term, only in the mid to the long term. Okay. Wow, a lot of questions like suddenly came in. So the next one is, with all the ongoing data privacy regulations, including the retirement of browser cookies, third-party data, and so on and so forth, do we think that digital advertising uh, will follow a downward trend, given that data privacy seems to be tightening up?
Yeah. But honestly, I've been reading a lot on the data privacy issues, and
Mhm.
I think we really need to understand what's going to happen with these platforms, right? So the basic the basic tenet that is going to happen is it means that there's no sharing between platforms,
Mhm.
right? So when we say there are going to be no cookies, it doesn't mean that cookies will totally disappear. So individual platforms can still use cookies and they can track you and your activity if you allow them to use these cookies. What's going to change is, let's say within Facebook, and I use Facebook as an example. You're scrolling through your feed, you see an article, you click on the article and you read it. So the data transfer will not happen between Facebook and, let's say, if it's Complex Magazine or Nike.com,
Mm.
there's no transfer of information there.
Right.
And that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, a better example, Laszlo, might actually be, right, the Apple thing, right? So if you have Facebook on your Apple device, Facebook can still track you if your Apple ID, if you're using the Facebook app actively, right? But when it's not on, it cannot track your location. It cannot track any activity that you're doing. All of the apps on your iPhone uh, can share information with one another. At least historically, they could. Like historically, YouTube can share data with Chrome, which can share data with my Google apps, which can share data with Netflix, because my iPhone generates sort of like considered a unique advertiser ID. And all of the apps installed on this phone know whenever that advertiser ID is using something, right? So what it now prevents is Apple is saying, or at least the rule with Apple now is, nope, we're not going to share our users unique advertiser IDs unless they explicitly provide permission. And so if you guys get a new iPhone, what you'll realize is every time you open an app, it'll say, do you want to allow, not allow? Do you want to allow, do you not allow, right? So uh, in my opinion, I think it's a good thing, but I do not anticipate that there will be any long-term negative impact to digital. Like if there's anything 2020, 2021 are teaching us, we are actually sort of where the market is giving us a run for our money. Laszlo, our biggest problem is talent. Like we cannot grow talent fast enough to meet the
Yeah.
demand of the market. Are you guys encountering the same thing?
Yeah. I mean, well, for specific areas also, I mean, some people ask me, hey, do you have can you refer somebody? I'm like, you know what? I'm also in the lookout for somebody. It's hard to recommend because if you yourself are looking for one and have been searching for one, the pool is, well, shallow in that sense. I know it's been something that a lot of the younger ones have been interested in, but sometimes you're also looking for somebody with a bit more experience. And
Mhm.
as we were having a discussion earlier, the industry is kind of small. We kind of
Yeah,
know the people within this industry.
right.
I wanted to jump back in also just to that discussion on how is marketing going to change, digital
Mhm.
marketing in particular, with all of the data privacy issues. Um, as I think what we're also going to see is we're as marketers we're going to try to find different ways to, I guess,
Mhm.
circumnavigate these limitations. I was watching a video other day. It's like a British version of the Shark Tank, and this guy's product essentially was for it's an add-on platform wherein you can incentivize if you are sharing your particular data, but you
Oh,
still have the limit
wow.
that you put on your data. So I will share certain things about myself. I will say that I'm interested in certain topics. Therefore, you can send me advertising for this.
Right.
And on a monthly basis, I can get, I think it's like £50 in terms of vouchers for these particular things that I'm
Right.
interested in.
You're monetizing your data. That's a terrific
Yeah,
idea.
the idea is all of these platforms monetize you as a user. So he said, why don't you flip it on its head and you let the user actually get 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 something in return for sharing his data. So I think these
Yeah.
are simple ways that well, not simple, sorry. These are ways that people are trying to go around the data sharing issues. So it's going to be another evolution or another step in evolution of how digital marketing
Right.
will be.
We've only got time for two more questions because we're already running over time, but I appreciate all the questions that came in. A quick one is, we're B2B, we're about to launch, and we're putting in a budget for advertising. Should we run a simultaneous top funnel and should we run simultaneous top funnel and conversion campaigns, or should we focus on one and the other?
Right. If you're just about to launch, I would say that you have to consider the timing.
Mhm.
Perhaps not simultaneous, but you'll have to figure out the timing. So you want to start with the awareness because you're really if you're just introducing
Mhm.
yourself, you have to work on that first and figure the proper timing. And if the next question is, how long should I give? Normally, I would say, 6 to 12 weeks would be a good base for building awareness. But
Mhm.
somewhere from week 6 to week 12, that's when you start also introducing the other advertising for maybe
Right.
perhaps engagement, and then try to get people down into the funnel.
Yeah. The last question uh, is there a Goldilocks zone for the duration of A/B testing? Like how long should they spend A/B testing, let's say two different ad formats, two different landing pages?
If you talk to people from Facebook, they'll tell you 2 weeks is a good A/B testing period.
Mhm.
I think if you talk to people from Google, they'll say anywhere from 7 days to 2 weeks is also a good
Mhm.
A/B test. Um, but the caveat there is, I guess you have to have a large enough audience for you to also get
Mhm.
proper responses. Sometimes it's not a function of time; it's also a function of how many people will see
Yeah,
the ad
sample
versus how.
size, right. Okay. And with that, I know that there are still some questions. I super appreciate it, but we're running out of time. Laszlo, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. This was one of the largest crowds we've ever had on DX.
Great.
Yeah, so super appreciate everybody for joining us on this session. We have another one coming, I think May 19 or thereabouts. We'll send you guys the invite. We've got Jason Cruz joining us. Terrific guy. And we'll make sure to send you guys the invites. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Laszlo, thank you for
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, thank you for joining us. I appreciate the time. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you guys will join us for the next Truelogic DX. And until we talk again next time, cheers.